LessWrong posts. The first one we have is religions claim to be non-disprovable, which is one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's a good one. So it starts with this biblical story. The people of Israel are wavering between Jehovah and Baal. So Elijah announces he'll conduct an experiment to settle it. Quite a novel concept in those days. The priests of Baal will place their bull on an altar, and Elijah will place Jehovah's bull on an altar, but neither will be allowed to start the fire. Whichever god is real will call down fire on his sacrifice. The priests of Baal serve as the control group for Elijah. The same wooden fuel, the same bull, and the same priests making invocations, but to a false god. Then Elijah pours water on his altar, ruining the experimental symmetry, but this was way back in the early days, to signify deliberate acceptance of the burden of proof, like needing a 0.05 significance level. The fire comes down on Elijah's altar, which is the experimental observation. The watching people of Israel shout, "The Lord is God!" Peer review. Love it.
I love this whole explanation of history's first recorded experiment, which it isn't technically, but it was beautiful. It was all the parts of an experiment are there laid out, and it was just really fun to read.
Yeah, especially this. And then the people haul the 450 priests of Baal down to the river Kishon and slit their throats. This is stern but necessary. You must firmly discard the falsified hypothesis, and do so swiftly, before it can generate excuses to protect itself. If the priests of Baal are allowed to survive, they will start babbling about how religion is a separate magisterium which can neither be proven nor disproven.
Firm but necessary. Stern but necessary. Every now and then, just a little bit of mass murder to get the experiments going. It was wonderful, and it is in the making of this broader point that, as he says, back in the old days, people actually believed their religions instead of believing in them. And saying something like the local religion could not be proven would have gotten you burned at the stake. The vast majority of religions in human history tell stories of events that would constitute completely unmistakable evidence if they'd actually happened. I'm not sure exactly why this post appears here in the sequence of posts. It seems a bit disconnected from the rest of them, but I love it so much, I don't really care. But yeah, it's one of those, this was still the early-ish days of the new atheism, and there were still fights going on as to, whether the new atheists should just shut up about things, and religion is its own separate magisteria, that science can't say anything about it, and so forth. So this was pushing back on that. Points out that early Egyptologists were genuinely shocked to find no trace whatsoever of Hebrew tribes having ever been in Egypt. They weren't expecting to find a record of the 10 plagues, but they expected to find something. And they found out that during the supposed time of the Exodus, Egypt ruled much of Canaan. That is a huge historical error, but if there are no libraries, no one can call you on it. The Roman Empire did have libraries, and thus the New Testament doesn't claim big, showy, large-scale geopolitical miracles like the Old Testament did. Do we want to say anything about the whole experiments in religion thing?
Why did you have something in mind?
What I have in mind is that I agree completely with all of this. That people always say crap like, science you can't test religion with science or whatever, but then as soon as, this is like the old Mott and Bailey thing, then as soon as you're out of an actual formal debate, they're going back to their church and all their religious friends and family and being like, yep, this God miracle gave me a winning scratch ticket or cured my child's gout or whatever it was, Like they always act as if God really is there and is present in the world and is doing things, which, if it was the case, would be testable, because anything that has an effect on the real world can be seen in the real world, right?
Yeah.
You can measure it.
Yeah, I was earlier telling Inyash and Steven this story about watching one of my cancer patients receiving CAR T cells, and they had a priest in the room who came over and blessed the cells.
Yeah.
And then he blessed our hands.
I would have kindly...
It's like, I bless these cells.
Yeah. I would have kindly said I'd rather not have my hands blessed.
And I bless the hands of the healers.
Oh my god.
It's like, now let us all bow our heads in prayer. And I had no idea any of this was going to happen.
Yeah.
But apparently the patient was religious and had requested this happen, so we all had to kind of just go along with it. But it was awkward.
Dude.
We've got these, like, bioengineered high-tech cells that are being injected, and
it's
he's
important.
waving his hands around them, like
Yeah,
like
doing his magic on them. Yeah.
Anyway,
It's-
yeah. When I was a kid, I was told that if you pray and you are good, and you go to confession, because I was Catholic, God will give you whatever you want. Like, God will answer your prayers. So I'm like, okay. I got on top of my desk and I was like, I wish to fly. And then I fell. And I got back on the desk and I was like, oh, I really wish to fly. I super duper believe, and I've been good and said my confession, and I don't think I've ever done anything bad because I'm a little kid anyway, so just let me fly, just for 2 seconds. Fell again. Got back up and then was like, alright, God, if you let me fly, I will do extra chores, and I will be so good. I'm gonna donate money to charity, and I'm gonna... That fell again. Alright, God, I'm gonna stop believing in you if you don't make me fly.
Ooh, so threatening God.
Yeah, and then I fell again, and then my young self didn't come to the conclusion that God doesn't exist, but that he exists, but he's an asshole. It took me a little while longer to wrap my head around the atheism thing, because I've just never heard of it. I didn't know that was an option.
Right.
But yeah, I definitely kind of was like, God, after that. Yeah, that guy. Yeah. All right, sure.
Jerk. That's cool.
Yeah, there's also the whole women can't do stuff part of, or like, I don't know, weird outdated shit.
Was that still in part of Catholicism?
Oh yeah, like, I mean, you read the Bible. And then you're supposed to kind of double think the bad shit that you've read out of the Bible, but like, oh, but that was back in the day, and like, now we do things this way, but that's fine. And I'm just like, yeah, but what about, slaves were okay, but we're just gonna not talk about that. Okay. All right.
We're just gonna pretend God's not a jerk. Just like when he didn't let you fly.
God's a jerk.
Yeah. This goes into the next point that I was actually that I pulled out. The post says, not only did religion used to make claims about factual and scientific matters, religion used to make claims about everything. Religion laid down a code of law, the sexual morals, the form of government, answered scientific questions from biological taxonomy to the formation of stars. The modern concept of religion as purely ethical derives from every other areas having been taken over by better institutions. Ethics is what's left. Or rather, people think ethics is what's left. Ethics has not been immune to human progress. Why do people think that ethics is still fair game? Which, yeah, what the fuck?
I think because you can't disprove ethics. Ethics is still, like, you can still debate about it, and you can still have two different ideas. So the fact that you can't do an experiment and be like, well, animals evolved, or no, stars are created by big burning clouds of gas. You can argue with somebody all you want about whether ethics are evolved or whether God sent them down, and you can't really do anything to prove it.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you kind of can, but it's much fuzzier.
But like when the Bible says grasshoppers have 4 legs, people are like, well, the Bible isn't supposed to be a scientific document, right? So no big deal. But then the Bible says you can't, that it's okay to keep slaves. No one says, well, the Bible isn't supposed to be an ethical document. They're still like, it's an ethical document. We just ignore that part.
Yeah, no, that you were used to be allowed to keep slaves.
Yeah, exactly.
But not anymore.
Right? So, yeah, just the fact that people still say that it's about ethics is weird when they don't say that it's about laws of governance or about scientific claims. Because it's just as wrong on the questions of ethics as it is on all these other things.
It's, super wrong.
Yeah.
Where were we? If you say the earth is flat, people will look at you like you're crazy. But if you say the Bible is your source of ethics, women will not slap you. Most people's concept of rationality is determined by what they think they can get away with. They think they can get away with endorsing Bible ethics, so it only requires a manageable effort or self-deception for them to overlook the Bible's moral problem.
Yeah.
And the idea that religion is a separate magisterium that cannot be proven or disproven is a big lie. A lie which is repeated over and over again, so people will say it without thinking. Yet which is, on critical examination, simply false. It's a wild distortion of how religion happened historically, of how all scriptures present their beliefs, of what children are told to persuade them, and of what the majority of religious people on Earth still believe.
And there we go. It's giant Mont and Bailey lie, and we should call people on that crap when they try it.
Yeah. Actually, like, if I really think about it, the thing that finally made me an atheist was reading the Bible.
Yeah.
And it was in college. I actually took a Bible as literature class because I had a lit minor. And we read it with accompanying, I think they were like the Dead Sea Scrolls, and there was a feminist interpretation of the Bible and a couple of other different...
A feminist interpretation of the Bible?
Yeah, the instructor really wanted us to analyze it through various lenses. And,
that takes some mental gymnastics.
Oh, no, it was, like, not pro-Bible.
Oh, okay.
It was very much like, this is a horrifying book that tells terrible stories about women suffering and being disenfranchised. And
okay, I thought it was somehow a feminist pro-Bible thing.
I'm sure that probably exists.
I'm
sure lots of those exist.
Yeah.
But, yep, that did it.
Mm-hmm.
I wish more people would just read the damn thing. There's parts of it that are, like, a lot of the Old Testament is just animal sacrifice.
Yes.
So much animal sacrifice. It goes into endless detail about what color the cow has to be and how old it is and whether it's got spots and
that shit was important, man.
It's awful on the altar and what time of year you're allowed to do this and yeah, ethics.
I liked the post and it made a good point and it stuck with me, especially the first ever scientific experiment part. That really made it memorable.
Yeah, I wish that it had actually gone into why it is disprovable.
Why? Which is disprovable?
Religion.
Okay. Well, I mean, anytime religion makes a claim and that claim is contradicted by reality, it's partially disproven, right?
Yeah.
And you get enough of those claims and you're like, this is just a giant load of horseshit, isn't it?
I think that somebody who was not already convinced of the atheist viewpoint wouldn't read this and come out of it, like... feeling like that this was a good argument.
Right, yeah.
This is kind of a preaching to the choir. Like, maybe that was its purpose, and it's more about,
It was definitely preaching to the choir in the effect of... because there were a lot of people who are basically, or there still are, I guess, a lot of people who are basically non-religious in their day-to-day life, but will still go to church a couple times a year and say that they are, like, Christian or whatever, and when this separate magisterial stuff comes up, they're like, oh, yeah, you know, Bible's not a scientific document. I still believe that there's some kind of big God thing out there, and the Jesus helped us out or whatever. I just don't bother with all the little minutia because the Bible writers probably got that wrong, you know. And I think this is a very good counter to that. If someone was exposed to this, being like, "No, that's just you lying to yourself, and it is a very big lie." Because I meet a lot of people like that. I'm friends with a lot of people like that.
Yeah, I just wish this article would be something that I could point to them. I remember having a coworker who was religious and actually asked, like, well, if you can prove to me that evolution happened, then, I don't know. I've never encountered anything that I thought was good proof, so I spent a really long time sending him documents showing, like, DNA and fossils and, like,
it's literally
geology and...
Yeah.
There's so much evidence. I was just, like, spamming this guy, and then, like, I think he kind of, like, pretended to read a little bit of it and then closed it and then stopped reading any of it and was just like, I'll read that another time. Yeah. Like, okay. Yeah, you want to be proven wrong, alright.
Alright. Okay.
I wish, that there was, like, a place that I could have just sent him one link that had, like, the knockdown argument for here's why the Bible is a lie. Maybe that exists now, if anyone knows where that is.
No, there's no such thing.
Yeah.
Religion is such a deeply entrenched in your emotions and your mind kind of thing that it's in my opinion, literally impossible to send someone one link that would change their mind. It's a process that takes lots of time and some social support.
But I just want there to be one website that has all the evidence for the fact that life evolved.
There's many websites like that.
There's many, yeah, but that's intimidating. But if there were one link that I could send that just had all the information and you could go into history and mathematics and just like...
No, wouldn't matter. Worst case scenario, they would accept that evolution is true, but it was guided by God.
But that would still be a step forward, I think.
Okay.
Anyway, let's go on to the next one.
Okay.
The importance of saying oops.
Which religious people don't do until eventually one day. It starts out with a comment on Enron. Enron, for people who weren't around at the time, was a big energy firm based out of Texas, I believe, who were doing gangbusters, making lots of money, great company. And then all of a sudden, it turns out the entire thing is a fraud. They've lost $5 billion, and the whole thing collapses overnight. Lots of people are out a lot of money, and it was a huge financial scandal. And of course, no one went to jail because no one ever goes to jail for stealing $5 billion. You only go to jail for stealing 10, 20 bucks. But Eliezer read a book about it, and he said that a unsurprising feature of Enron's slow rot and abrupt collapse was that the executive players never admitted to having made a large mistake. When catastrophe number 247 grew to such an extent that it required an actual policy change, they would say, "Too bad that didn't work out. It was such a good idea. How are we going to hide the problem on our balance sheet?" As opposed to, "It now seems obvious in retrospect that it was a big mistake from the beginning."
If we only admit to small local errors, we will only make small local changes. The motivation for big change comes from acknowledging a big mistake.
This is a post that is pro-epiphany, basically. It's saying, you know what? Every now and then, take major stock of your life. And this, I get the feeling this is how most people actually do abandon religion. So maybe it was related to the previous post. But it takes a lot of little small errors and mistakes and oopses over a long period of time until eventually you're like, holy shit, this whole thing was wrong, right? Or at least that was the case for me.
I think that is probably the case for most people. I expect that there's a few people who converted on the spot, or deconverted as the case may be, but probably more often there's more and more questioning over time.
Yeah. But at some point, you gotta acknowledge you made a big mistake. And Eliezer says, a traditional rationalist upbringing tries to produce arguers who will concede to contrary evidence eventually. There should be some mountain of evidence sufficient to move you. This is not trivial. It distinguishes science from religion. But there is less focus on speed, on giving up the fight as quickly as possible, integrating evidence efficiently so that it only takes a minimum of contrary evidence to destroy your cherished belief. There is a powerful advantage to admitting when you have made a large mistake. It's painful. It can also change your whole life. And I don't know entirely how I feel about this because, I mean, sure, if you're wrong about something, especially something important, you want to stop being wrong as soon as possible, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you're wrong about whether slavery is good, you want to change your slavery position as soon as you can.
I want to change whether, if you're wrong about whether global warming is a thing, and that we need to do something about it, I want to very quickly change to, hey, let's do some mitigation.
Yeah.
Let's very quickly try to do what we can to fix this.
Here in business, it's always best to, if you're going to fail in something, fail fast. That way you don't spend a lot of time and a lot of money on something that's going to fail. Yeah,
I mean, that's kind of more related to agile sort of structures where you're coming up with lots of different ideas and trying to move quickly and really quickly, like, test them all, figure out which ones don't work, throw them out, and keep moving towards the better ones, the ones that work, the ones that test the best.
And so I agree that's a big advantage and something one would want, but I mean, the problem is if you knew the thing was wrong, you would already not be doing it, right?
Well, when you find out it's wrong is what he's saying. You have to be willing to be like, oops, I was wrong, I fucked up big time, and I'm gonna acknowledge that and move on. And I agree. I remember somewhere in the rational sphere I read people talking about wanting to norm if people admit that they have made a mistake, that everybody cheers and high fives them. And I love that. And actually I've started like a little habit of doing that with my friends.
Cool.
Where like, oh, I realize I messed up, or like leaving my last job, I got cheered and high-fived by my friends. I was like, yeah, that was a mistake. And now I'm unemployed and I gotta find another job. And it's like, it felt great for them to be like, yeah, that job sucked. Get out of there. You did it. You now you can find a better job. And it's like, yeah, well, kick this idea in the trash. Now I can find a better idea. Something that you should feel proud of.
Yeah.
And that I wish society, like, didn't punish us so hard for, like, the societal norm wasn't that it's embarrassing and you lose face if you go and publicly say, I've made a mistake. That should be something that we're like, you know, if a politician comes and says, oh, I realize I've made a mistake about this policy and that science shows that actually this is better. That should be something that people are like, yeah, like, I want to vote for that politician. You know? Yeah. It's like, we have this, like, weird idea that people need to always be right and always look confident. And...
But I also think giving up on things too quickly can be a problem too. Like, that would make you a easy target for, like, get-rich schemes, what do they call those? Multi-level marketing schemes, or
Well, I think the point is
religious claims and cults and things like that.
Once you have evidence that shows that you were wrong, then unless, like, somebody faked some evidence or something.
No, I mean, people often do fake evidence. And,
yeah, I guess. I mean...
And in general, like...
You want to investigate and really find out whether you were wrong, and I think you should be really rigorous about that, but...
Yeah, some things are not that clear-cut, and you could be confused about something, and...
Well, I think that's a case where you wouldn't throw it out if you're not sure. You have to keep investigating. Eventually you'll find enough evidence one way or the other.
Right. Well, I mean, but that's
most things.
That is what Eliezer's sort of arguing against. He did say that everyone agrees at least everyone in the rationalist sphere agrees that there's some mountain of evidence that can change your mind on some things, but Eliezer's saying that level should maybe be a little bit lower so people don't hang on to ideas for too long, which on the one hand is true, but on the other hand is also a bit of a defense mechanism.
I think it's also fine to be able to admit that I used to have absolute faith and confidence in this hypothesis, but now I'm reading this stuff that seems to say the opposite thing, and I'm not quite sure which one it is yet, so I'm kind of holding off on saying which one I'm going to support until I have collected more evidence, and that should also be fine. I think that's
the biggest advantage of this whole Bayesian rationality movement, is the idea to have degrees of confidence in beliefs rather than being just like, I'm a capitalist or I'm a communist, It's more like, give 80% credence to the capitalism thing, and I'm not being on one side or the other.
Yeah.
So much. Because, there was a time when it was easy to convince people that socialism was the best thing to do because
it hadn't been tested.
It hadn't been tested on paper. It looked great, Everything would be better if this worked out, so people were like, yeah, I find this convincing, and that turned out to be bad. So some people were too easily swayed in that regard.
This article ends with, don't indulge in drama and become proud of admitting errors. It's surely superior to get it right the first time. But if you do make an error, better by far to see it all at once, which is kind of the thing that I disagree with. I think that we should, as a society, norm it being fine to admit when you've made an error. Especially the whole fail fast thing, too. Like, I like that that's becoming something that's more widely known, that businesses are using, that people developing software are using. Try lots of stuff. If it doesn't work, move on to the next thing.
Well, I do think he's right that, it is better to be right the first time, but... Yeah, you're right. Admitting error should be a celebrated thing. He says, I have watched others making their own series of minimal concessions, grudgingly conceding each millimeter of ground, never confessing a global mistake where a local one will do. They do their best to minimize their embarrassment by saying I was right in principle, or it could have worked, or I still want to embrace the true essence of whatever I'm attached to. Defending their pride in this passing moment, they ensure they will again make the same mistake and again need to defend their pride. So, yeah, in general, I think he makes a good point about failing fast when you can.
You're failing publicly and owning up to it.
Yeah.
Next time we're going to read Focus Your Uncertainty and the Proper Use of Doubt.
Yes. And there are links to those, again, at thebayesianconspiracy.com.